One cool morning, I found myself drawn to the edge of the village, just past the fields where the ground turned rocky and uneven. The place where Thomas, the missionary, had set up his makeshift dwelling stood half hidden by tall grasses, its sides patched with cloth to keep out the night's chill. I wasn't sure why I kept coming to this spot. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the strange questions he left swirling in my head each time I thought of his words. But as the sun rose, I crouched low behind a cluster of shrubs, watching as Thomas moved around his small camp. He was humming softly to himself, his back turned to me as he packed items into a small cloth bag. I was about to creep closer when, out of nowhere, a quick flash of movement caught my eye. A sleek, thin green snake slithered across the rocks, weaving silently toward Thomas, its tiny tongue flickering. "Thomas!" I called instinctively. My was a sharp whisper, but he didn't hear me, and in an instant, the snake struck, its fangs sinking into his leg. He stumbled back with a cry, clutching his calf, his face turning pale. Without thinking, I leaped from my hiding spot, my feet pounding against the ground as I ran toward him. His eyes widened as he saw me approach, a mix of shock and relief flickering over his face. "Au revoir," he stammered, his voice weak. His gaze was fixed on the bite, his hands trembling. "Don't move," I commanded, keeping my voice steady as I bent down to examine the wound. I had seen snake bites before, watched the older men deal with them in the forest. I didn't know if the snake was venomous, but I knew that we couldn't take chances. I tore a strip of cloth from my wrapper, tying it tightly just above the bite to slow the spread of any poison. Then, with a deep breath, I lifted Thomas onto my back. He was heavier than I'd expected, his weight pressing down on my shoulders as I struggled to keep my balance. But I gritted my teeth and pressed on, my feet finding their way over the uneven ground as I carried him toward the village. The path seemed longer than ever, my legs burning with the effort. Thomas muttered faintly in my ear, his voice slurring as he drifted in and out of consciousness. But I pushed on, my only thought to reach Mama Eben, the village's herbal healer. She knew the plants and roots of our land better than anyone, and if anyone could help Thomas, it would be her. By the time I stumbled into her compound, I was drenched in sweat, my arms trembling from the strain. Mama Eben's face appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in the scene in an instant. She beckoned me forward, her hands moving swiftly as she gathered her herbs and poultices. "Lay him down here," she said, pointing to a mat on the ground. I lowered Thomas carefully, my chest heaving as I finally let myself catch a breath. Mama Eben knelt beside him, her hands moving with a practiced speed as she inspected the bite. "This one is fresh," she murmured, nodding to herself. She pulled out a small bundle of herbs, their leaves crushed and oozing a dark green juice. She pressed them firmly over the bite, her wrinkled hands steady as she whispered a soft chant, calling on the spirits to aid her in her work. Thomas let out a groan as the herbs touched his skin, his face twisting in pain. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white, his breath coming in short gasps. I could see the tension in his body, the fear in his eyes, the fear that this might be the end. Mama Eben continued her work, her hands gentle but firm as she rubbed the herbal paste into the bite, her lips moving in an old, soft prayer. The air was thick with the scent of crushed leaves and dirt, the smell grounding me as I watched, my own fear ebbing with each of her steady movements. After a while, Thomas' breathing slowed, his face relaxing as the initial shock faded. He looked down at his leg, his eyes still wide but less frantic, and then he let out a shaky laugh. I don't think it's poisonous," he said, his voice weak but filled with a surprising calm. No need to worry. Mama Eben paused, her sharp eyes narrowing as she looked at him. Not poisonous, she repeated, her voice low, as if she were testing his words. Thomas gave a weak chuckle, nodding as he propped himself up on one elbow. It's a type of snake we see in my home country, not dangerous. I panicked, but it's harmless. A murmur of laughter escaped me, a mix of relief and amazement. I had feared the worst, my heart racing at the thought of another person being lost. But here he was, the color returning to his face, his breath steady. Mama Eben raised an eyebrow, giving him a worried smile. Not poisonous, eh? She said, a hint of reproach in her tone. Then perhaps you didn't need my herbs after all. Thomas shook his head quickly, a sheepish smile spreading across his face. No, your herbs, they helped, he said, his voice earnest. Thank you. I was grateful for everything. He glanced at me, his eyes soft with gratitude. Especially you, oh ByVee. I was lucky you were there. The warmth of his words made me feel strange, like something heavy was loosening inside me. I had saved him, this stranger who brought with him strange ideas and unsettling questions. And yet, as I looked at him now, I saw not a threat but a man grateful and vulnerable, someone whose intentions I was beginning to understand. Mama Eben began to pack up her herbs, her expression thoughtful as she regarded us both. This world is full of surprises, she murmured, her eyes lingering on Thomas. We must be careful with what we don't understand, but we must also listen. Sometimes, understanding comes quietly. Thomas looked at her, his gaze softening with respect. He nodded, as if taking her words to heart. Thank you, truly, he said, his voice low. As I helped him back to his feet, I felt the weight of the morning's events settle over me. This man was different from the others who had come before, not a raider but a stranger who, despite everything, had come with an open heart. For the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, his presence held something more than the shadows of the past. As we walked back toward his dwelling, I couldn't shake the feeling that his presence in OWA had a purpose we had yet to fully understand.